think that's working now. All right. Okay, so welcome everyone. This presentation is called Drupal Recipes and the Secret Life of Config Actions. So my name is Lefebvre. I'm a web developer for Coldfront Labs. After the keynote presentation though, I'm probably more of a site builder. I kind of like that term, just in the amount of like new sites that I'm building or replacing some D7 sites in migration to new stuff, that there's a lot of times where I'm either taking something that can't go directly to Drupal 10 or something that's still in Drupal 7 even though it's been in life for a while. But yeah, I kind of like that idea of there are some people that are building sites and they're spending so much time in UIs and in things and trying to get the site working right and trying to get the theme to work in the front end, that you can get like 80% of the way into developing a new site or getting a site up and running, and then you need the kind of mainstay developers to kind of get the rest of the code going, or oh, this thing needs to be factored in a certain way. And sometimes Drupal kind of sets up enough different ways of doing things that as you're trying to build them, you can kind of get them all mixed up there. So yeah, I come from a background before coding, but I've been learning Drupal and working on Drupal for about 4 years, and this presentation will be about recipes, and here's kind of the plan. So there are a lot of presentations about recipes already. Who has been to camps about or seen presentations about recipes before? And who's put on presentations about recipes before? Okay, so if anything goes wrong in my demo, then I can turn to Martin. But no, so there's a lot of talk about recipes. Recipes are kind of a new way, or kind of a built-in way that kind of solves some problems and has some specific use cases for helping Drupal development and kind of speeding up that process of, hey, this Drupal site needs to get built. The client wants it done in like 6 months, but sometimes Drupal development stuff and theming, getting everything done kind of takes like 6 or 9 or 10 months, and then the client's like, can you do it faster? And so recipes are kind of in a space to try and speed that up. So today we're going to be talking about recipes, highlighting a lot about config actions and just what they do, how to apply recipes, and then a little bit more detail about recipes, and then wildcards and tokens, and then some other things too, and a demo about that I have set up here, and how to use recipes as profile, just kind of laying in the like layman's term side of, hey, if you're someone who isn't super code heavy focused, but you need to understand what's going on, and you have an ability to add code or add files or add config, and you're trying to get the best kind of layout there, that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. And yeah, so just as a quick overview of what is a recipe. A recipe is a collection of instructions. You can be used for adding config files or for enabling modules or altering the way that files are being brought into the site. They can save a lot of time, like I just said, and you can kind of quickly add and have functionality being added to the site. I had asked Drupal AI, like, hey, can you just let me know when recipes were added? And they said that there was an issue that they found for Drupal 8 about some recipe content type, and I'm like, no, not that kind of recipe AI. So I had to look it up myself. And yeah, so it's been about 4 years since it was first announced, and since 10.3 and Drupal 11, we've had access to recipes, and there was a whole config action API system that was implemented that we can make use of. Being able to get recipes to do what we want, or being able to alter the config that we're adding to a file and adding to a working site. And just a quick overview of config actions, because we'll be spending a lot of time into recipes and into config actions today. And config actions are like the brainstem of a recipe. They kind of change the way that config is being applied. They kind of come in 3 parts. You're basically just targeting a certain type of file, you're running a specific type of config action, and then you're having to think about when recipes are being applied. Are you targeting just one type of file or one type of content type, or are you trying to do something that's kind of across the board? And if you're adding multiple things too, that there's a whole naming convention that seems to work really well for using them. And as I was learning recipes and developing my slides and demos and stuff, the documentation's been improving. So there's some things about like naming conventions for naming recipes and types that I've missed, but I'm glad to know that this is an active feature that's being worked on there. So we'll touch on that here and there. So just as a quick overview for anyone who's not too familiar with recipes, recipes need to have a few things. They ultimately need to have a recipe.yaml file. In there will be instructions for listing any modules that you want to enable. Tried ignoring that, but I don't think I could. Anyway, sorry. That was okay. We are at a museum. Recipes can depend on other. They can depend on other recipes. So when you do this, you don't have to put everything into one mega monolith recipe. It's actually better to kind of structure recipes to kind of do one thing and do them very well. And then you can have a recipe that includes other recipes, and then they run as well. So you could have information there in your YAML file about other recipes that you want to depend on, or just have run first. They'll have the name and the type of recipe involved in there. And also, if you're importing config, installing config, or applying config actions, some recipes will have like a config, like a folder, and your like config files that you want to be adding if you're adding something else. In terms of configuration settings or configuration entities, that those can be included there. And then if you are contributing this onto Drupal.org or just kind of keeping track of recipes in their own repos, the composer file that you join to it will have like the module dependencies that you need, but also the type. If you have it as Drupal recipes, is the kind of way to kind of name that. Sometimes the like best place to put recipes is a little. You can kind of just use them whenever you want, and so sometimes people will put a whole bunch of recipes into one like custom module, and then those recipes will still work if you don't have their own composer files, but it generally will have them because you'll have them separate. Here's an example of a wonderful recipe that I found about events for adding, say, the event content type and a bunch of important regular things for fields and for turning on modules and having those permissions on board there. So just for what a recipe YAML file looks like, the events recipe will have it'll have the core modules installed if they're not installed already, and then it'll add the other contrib modules that you need. And so the idea is that this will run, and then your files get added, the modules will be turned on if they're not already enabled, and then you have all this config that gets applied. So it's not really installing actual like config that will just be ready to go. You still have to do things like exporting your changes and committing them. But yeah, if you think of it as, oh, I want this recipe, I want to apply this to the site and then see it, that's how we're tracking these things. Another thing too about a recipe is that we are adding and changing configurations that are there, that we're not deleting anything or removing functionality that recipes don't really know how to, or we're not intending that recipes are at that state for kind of in that type of maintenance cycle of like, oh, I don't want this anymore, I want to undo this. Like there's no like, oh no, I take it back. Like if you have the recipe run and it's like, oh, I don't like this, then you can just config import and just kind of, move on, and it'll just turn everything back. So a couple use cases for why we're using recipes. I think I just said one already there about them being applied. But yeah, we want to use recipes because it's a good way for sharing and kind of combining different types of config. So not just, oh, here's the content type and now here the view is separate. That with recipes, you're able to kind of take all of the related content configuration, all the configuration kind of concepts between blocks or layouts or whatever kind of goes into like an idea, and package them all together. And older Drupal 7 had Drupal features as a way to kind of do this as well. And so recipes are kind of like slotting themselves into a way of applying changes. You can save time because you don't have to, if you're tired of like installing a module and then checking to see if the settings are there, and there's like a very important feature that you need but the checkbox is unchecked, and after you've like tried to like see if the module worked and you're like, oh, why isn't it working? You can make your own recipe for learning from that mistake, and then it's like, okay, whenever I'm using this module again, I know that I'm installing with the recipe, and then my settings that I always use will always be applied. It can also save time in kind of skipping like repeatable tasks. For the last site that I did, I had to add about 192 image style files, config files for all of the different image styles for like 9 different responsive images. Anyway, so that was The last time I have to do that manually because that had to go into a recipe, but we needed it done once and had the recipe checked and validated. So if you're finding that you're a site builder who is trying to put in functionality and it's like, oh man, like you can do most of what Drupal can do within the UI, and if you're good at kind of going through and navigating the UI and doing things, there's some parts of Drupal that there's a lot of click fatigue that sets in. So I do recommend thinking about using recipes, especially for information that you're looking to share, either like within the same team or like within different project. If you had some new SDC component-based kind of approach of, oh hey, we added this component to a paragraph, and now it works really well in layout paragraphs. We were going to put that into a recipe, and instead of just sharing like 6 random config file or like 10 config files just in a folder and being like, hey, I just need to get these and move them in. If you packed them up at a recipe, then you have that content saved as a recipe that's just easier to reuse multiple times or in other projects. And then also recipes can be used as Drupal profiles. As like a kind of replacement for the old distribution system that Drupal used to rely on for minimal and standard, and they still have this. But if you are involved in, hey, I need to have a site kind of structure that needs to be repeated multiple times, you can kind of define all of that config as a recipe and then use that as your installer profile that will go into detail, and can just show that really quickly as a demo. But yeah, those are all like the use cases. So just making sure that we're starting with an awareness of what recipes can and can't do. So once again, yeah, recipes are applying changes. They're not really installing them. They don't update in the way that update hooks work. So when you're using an update hook to kind of change config or change content, those can only be run once, where recipes, idiopotency. So I learned that from the documentation from another presentation that I saw from Martin as well, about this idea that recipes are intended to be created, that you can run them multiple times, that if you are running them and then if you run them a second time, they're not going to cause any errors, they're not going to break, it's not going to say, hey, you've reached the limit of recipes you can add. That there are times where you'll run a recipe and the order that you're running recipes can change things too, and so sometimes you have to be careful or just pay attention to what's being changed, what's being added. And there's ways that recipes will change some of your configuration settings. So we actually use that as a strength. We just need to kind of understand and tap into this direction of input of, okay, this is now adding some functionality. Once they're used, the site has no real awareness that the recipe existed. There's no like real direct tracking or caring, which kind of leads into some kind of, not really confusion, but like some misconceptions, or just the way that recipes are like a little bit different than modules and themes and other types of implementation, kind of what we expect for like, oh, like who's maintaining this recipe? Or if you had a recipe that you used and then it like changes, or like another functionality was added to it, you're not going to get like aware that, oh hey, the recipe got improved and there's now like a 2.0 version. You might want to run the 2.0 version. There's no way for the site to track at this point that it's been doing that. So you might not care, but you might be like, oh, what's missing? And that type of like tracking or just being able to test it is in a slightly different workflow, but there's things that recipes do that we don't want them to act like modules. So we'll be looking at that a bit today. They don't have any PHP code. They have a little bit of, we'll get into wildcards about how they can have their own custom logic for things, but there's a lot that they can't decide how much of the recipe is going to run. So if you're running a recipe, it's like an all or nothing thing. You're going to get all the modules turned on, all the files added, all of the config actions have to be applied. There's no like split the difference of like, oh hey, like I want to have this logic of just like, hey, this one config action here, but if it's a different setting. But there are some things that we can do with certain inputs where we can put in some placeholder information. And then yeah, you still need to export your changes and commit them. If you happen to be on a prod site and you run a recipe on there to get those changes, like they're not going to persist because the code base isn't keeping track of them. So there's still some validation that's needed for that. Okay, so config actions, a kind of like big starting point kind of difference between config actions is this decision on when you're adding config, within a recipe, are you going to make it strict or not strict? And so if the config is set to strict, if you have strict as true, or like if there's some files that have to be there, the implementation strategy is that the config files that are being added, if they already exist and it can't like rewrite over them, it's going to give you some errors. It's going to say like, hey, this recipe can't run because there's already configuration files that are there. And so we want this sometimes when you want to make sure that a file like doesn't get overridden and we get unexpected changes. But if you have config set to not strict, then the recipe is going to be like, hooray, great, I found some stuff and now it has the new code in here, it has the new changes in it. So depending on what the recipe is doing, you kind of want to have this freedom of flexibility of just, hey, like say I'm maintaining 20 sites and all 20 sites need to have the same slight configuration change. I don't want to make the same commit like over and over again. You can kind of develop a recipe in a way that is changing config, and then instead of having to write an update hook, if you're able to just affect all of the different websites, run the recipe all those times, and then you can just backport and have all your commit changes there, that there's ways that you want recipes to be in this way of changing things. So I just want to make sure that we have that distinction. And then if you are, most people who are aware of the configuration manager and how config settings kind of work, that there's a difference between configuration settings and configuration entities. And if you are adding configuration entities, the kind of big tell is that the configuration file has like 2 periods in it, so it's doing like view display mode where it's having like the multiple dots in the file name. But those are all configuration entities, and recipes kind of need to have them defined in your recipe YAML to be applied. But settings that are added through like a module install, for example, you don't have to declare them within the recipe. When the module installs the recipe, it'll add all of its default config and things that are needed there. And if you don't need to change them, or if you only want some of them to run, you can also change that. Okay, so we'll get to adding recipes during my demo, but I don't want to skip on some more config action stuff. So here is an example of a recipe that is applying this config action, and the config action, do I have my pointer? Why do I have a pointer? That might be better. There we go. So the config action is right here, which is the simple config update. And this is something that you use for updating configuration settings. This config action is intended for configuration settings, and if you're looking at updating configuration entities in this way, it kind of works, but sometimes doesn't. But the documentation says that you should be using set properties, but set properties aren't totally found in the documentation sometimes. So anyway, the point is that if you're just doing simple changes with simple settings, you can use that config action. And then if this one doesn't work, there's many other config actions that we're going to get to. But when you run this recipe here, if you wanted to change the front page or change the default language or whatever settings are in here, when the recipe applies, it's going to change the database's version of these files. So the system file kind of stores your basic like site name and kind of where the 404 pages are and stuff. And so if we were to run this recipe, those 2 file lines would change, and then you get to keep those changes. So it's mainly just we're either adding setting files that don't exist, or we're changing them that's in there. The documentation site has a lot of different, if you are in the business of making your own recipes, there's a lot of different config actions that are adding different things, and depending on what you're using them for and what you're trying to add, you'll have to find like what is the right config action that will kind of do the change that you're looking for. But a lot of them are very like name specific to doing like one thing well. So if you're adding fields with a recipe, you're going to want to use the set label config action to change what the label title is, or the set description to like add what the description that goes in like the field box whenever you're looking at them from the manage fields display. If you want the field that you're adding to be set to required, then you would just kind of use that config action. So instead of this all just being like one global like, hey, I want all of these changes all being set there, we do have all of those config actionable things are all split off into their own config actions. I think I'll talk about why there's plural here in the next slide. but I wanted to separate that a lot of what we're adding or adding features to the site, if we're adding fields within recipes or adding different display modes or adding components to things that we're kind of figuring out, okay, what am I trying to do? What is that part of the form? Okay, I don't want to just copy over forms all the time. I want the recipe to be there. And I didn't talk about it there, so we'll get to it anyway, it's fine. Okay, so wildcards are the way that recipes can kind of apply changes across multiple config files at the same time. And so if you do something like, hey, I want this changed and I want it applied to, in this example, user role.star, that it will take that config action, the grant permissions, and it will apply that change to every single role on your site. It will just go through all of them. And so we use wildcards to kind of not just target like one specific change, but we use them to kind of go through. And sometimes I found that these are really useful when you have, so far the biggest thing that this has solved for me is when I have to add a new field, or if I have to make a new display mode, or I have to add like a certain field to a new display mode, the process of having to go through the manage display and going through each content type, that I'm so happy now to like have this to be able to be like, okay, I'm just applying this change, it's going across the board, and my site going from like 10 content types to 11 and having to mitigate all that is not going to increase the time required for making all those manual changes. And yes, you can just skip the recipe part and just grab all of the config files that you need from wherever you're getting it from and just throwing it in and just hitting config import. But the whole, like, if we're entering a point where we are developing recipes to solve common problems of adding functionality and features, if we're looking at what the recipe is adding, seeing if that works, and then we're testing it with what changes we're expecting once we run it and see what's happening. If we like it, then we can config export and go from there. But yeah, we're going to be looking at a bit of the difference here with using wallets. Yeah, okay. Another important part about config actions is this naming convention, where you'll see that the config actions will have like an S at the end if they're referring to plural. And the config actions are defined to, it needs to know if I'm just applying this change, like the one property, but if I'm changing two different things. So if we just look at this one here where it's, hey, I'm a config action, I'm going to look at every single node type and I'm going to check if the language content setting it exists on each of these. And if it does exist, then it's just going to skip it and do nothing. But if it doesn't exist, then it's going to add the content setting of the bundle name and make sure it's defined there and targeting the bundles. So the bundle will be each one of those stars. So if you have 6 content types, it's going to run that check 6 times, and then it's going to go through and it's going to make a new thumbnail image style based on that name. So you don't have to do both those things at the same time. The recipe is going to run. It's going to check and add this language content settings file, and also it's going to make you an image style thumbnail for free within the same action. But there's times where you don't want the image style to get made if you already have it, so it's kind of nested that way. But if you are running multiple of these, you need to tell, or you need to specify explicitly if you're running just one action or not. So if you're writing your own recipes, knowing the difference between how they're named, it's very deliberate, it's very on purpose, because we're wanting to make sure, hey, that this extra code doesn't need to fire, or just the way that the changes are being applied and added, it does matter. And if you hit create, there's a difference between create and create if not exists, because you'll just get like extra files if you set strict and done and it's just set to create. But yeah, I wanted to talk about that quickly, and just this kind of create function of, you can just kind of create files with wildcards, and you don't have to literally like put those config files into the config folder and apply them. That this is, the recipe is basically generating specific files that you want for you. You don't have to ask an AI to make things and then see if it understood you. That if you're following someone else's recipe that has these config actions specified, it's oh, okay, I know with this I'm getting the right type of code, I'm getting the right type of files to validate, and then I'm expecting there to see this number of changes. And then there's another good config action that I wanted to highlight too, that's just about creating copies. So if you have, this is taking a view mode that already exists in the site that's called search result, and it's saying, hey, I have the search result view display, but I need to make other like teaser displays, and so it's going to take that config file, use it as a copy, and then make a new teaser display mode for every single node type that exists. And so we can kind of use this create copy to take something that works and then extend it as many times as you need to. Now, say it's like, oh, I only wanted like 5 of them or all of them. Like, you don't have to keep every single change that's being applied that's there. It's just the recipe's running. And if there are some fine tuning that you need, that you want to specify, then you don't have to like, you're never locked in of, oh, I need all parts of this recipe. The recipe is just doing applying, and then you can kind of validate, check, and you can, you know, if you're trying to do a change at the same time and it's like, oh man, I need to do all of this for one content type and then all this for another. If you have a solution that works with the recipe, you can just apply it. Oh, I only wanted 2 of them, or you can kind of specify with, there's another config action. Oh, I have the other one. I do, okay. There's this add node type one that you can kind of specify. I only want these specific node types to be added. So the wildcard thing does apply across the board, but it's not like a recipe is that, oh, I wanted you to do this one specific thing, or I want you to do all these things. That some of the config actions, they're built from the developers that understand that there's some portability or some kind of customization from there. And so this page, just looking at a few more, I tried breaking up the long list of config actions into some different categories. And we kind of looked at the grant permissions ones already, but there's just other types of things. So if you're setting third-party settings with a module and you want to just set those settings there, you can do that one. Permissions again, adding permissions for like edit access or something, or delete access for content types. Working with workflows, if you have a content moderation system and you have, if you're just like, oh, we have this very, very standard, like we have multiple clients and they don't really care about the different types of content management. They just want like the publish, unpublished draft stuff. You can have that recipe there. You can use the recipe, apply it to the nodes that matter, and then you're done. Adding files or adding fields or adding paragraphs to every single node is easy with the add to all bundle. Add items to toolbars with Seek-Editor if you're adding Seek-Editor 5 plugins. Now, as I said, you can't delete or remove configuration, but you can disable things or enable them with views. So if you know that there's something that's not used anymore, you can still mark them as being irrelevant, or if you are replacing something that Core did and you want to use this other one instead for whatever reason, recipes kind of give you that permission to do that. And then I've done some experimenting with editing layout builder. Oh, I need to go faster because I'm running out of time for my demo. But yeah, adding some some layouts and adding fields to the manage display part is a lot of the work that we're trying to do. And then just some general rules for applying recipes. We typically use Drush for applying recipes and Drush recipe, and wherever your recipe seems to be located. Like I said, when you run a recipe, it kind of runs in this order. Well, it will run the other recipes first. It'll install modules. These other recipes have to pass. If there's any errors in them, the whole thing won't run. Also, these recipes are completely separate from each other. They have no way of like talking to each other or like really being aware. They just, the one that you're running, if it has other dependencies, it's like, oh, I need to wait until those are done. Then it will install its modules, it'll apply its config, it'll apply its config actions, and then if it has any default content, I didn't really go into that today, it will apply that default content that it's all set up to work with that. And so if you have any of those kind of stock demo content that you want to test a feature, that can go there. This is new in my demo. I haven't quite done this, but I'm glad to know that there is a naming convention for naming recipes and for having a descriptor for where things are. Because when you're naming recipes, you have a whole different list of them, but there's the same kind of single, multiple. So even in defining the recipe, when you're looking at what the name is, you should know, okay, what is this applying to? Oh, this is a recipe about paragraph types. Oh, this is a recipe about fields. This is a recipe about adding content moderation, that we want the recipes to do one thing by its name. We'll know if it's plural or singular. We know if it's applying a set of a name of something. Where if you're doing something extra, like anyway, there's best practices for everything that we're doing. And then I want to highlight this quickly because I like this part a lot. You can add an input to your recipes. So when I run this recipe, it's going to give me a prompt, and it's a very basic like question of like, hey, what's the name of the new view mode? So in this recipe, I'm adding a new view mode that I don't want to like have to go through and click through the adding a new view mode. I can run this recipe and it'll just say, hey, what's the new view mode called? And I'll say like, oh, this is now the card display mode. That this recipe will give me the files that I want. And I have this recipe, and if I have to do this again with another display mode, I can just run the same recipe again, give it a different answer, and I don't need to make like 10 different recipes. That these inputs, they handle very simple select or very simple inputs, but you can pass this kind of input value forward, and then if you have like certain other prompts too, you can ask like, hey, like what do I want this description to be, and then it will give you the generated configuration file with the description that you added. So you can make recipes that do that. Okay, and then using as a profile, well, I'll just demo this, but you can just use a recipe that you've made, and it will install the site as if it was standard. And you can even require like a demo profile. Say you want to add some things, but you don't want to just start from scratch and just redo everything. You can use Drupal Core's standard recipe and just go from there. But recipes are there to help you, and if you want to add them, or if you want to start from a profile that you know that works, then you can substitute the old dependency kind of manager stuff into what this is now. Okay, in my demo, I just want to talk about a few modules that I'm going to be using just for this, just to kind of spread some awareness. Some of these aren't very popular, but they kind of give a level of interest, of insight of like what we're going to be talking about. So one is just the recipe tracker module. We'll just see, it'll keep a log of every recipe that's been run. If you are interested in recipes, or if you're just trying to like keep track of like, hey, I don't want to give a bunch of site maintainers access to just run whatever recipes they want, you can kind of have a quick log of who applied what changed, like just what are we dealing with, because there's no default way for Core to kind of know what's happened or where these things came from. So you can kind of use this log manager just to kind of see. There's a module that is very, very, very new, still under construction, not really intended for prod, but I really like the logo. It's called the Ratatouille module. This Ratatouille module can help you export config and content into just a recipe just to have. So I wanted to demo this just as like a way of like, hey, I have a site and there's a part of it that is good that I want to use elsewhere. You can use something like the Ratatouille module to kind of extract that working config. If you can kind of, and even get you to kind of think of constructing recipes as a, what is the minimum amount of functionality that I need, but I don't want to do a whole site export, or I don't want to just like guess. You can kind of take that configuration, we'll kind of just test out the Ratatouille module just to see how it works, but you can kind of have that recipe, and then you can test that recipe. Hey, on a fresh install, if I just do this recipe, is it going to do what I want? And then there's the project browser module, which is part of Drupal CMS, and this also has functionality for modules. Cool. So I need to do my demo stuff quickly. Because it's only like 5 minutes, but that's fine. So I have a very simple demo site here. Let me just go to my local. Okay, so I'm not even logged in. Cool. Okay, now I'm logged in, and I don't have my modules on that I wanted to demo on purpose because I can just run this. So I have, let's see here, the best way to kind of show this one. So I just have my recipes set up in a recipe folder. This one's very, very simple. It's just going to be turning on those 3 modules that I defined. It's called the demo profile. I can set this as a profile if I needed to, but it's just Drush recipe and then run the location of the recipe. And what did I do wrong? Oh, I didn't do this right. Probably looking for it. It's probably mad at me because it already exists on the thing. Okay, well, we're gonna make it go away. Okay, it's gone. We're gonna run and apply this demo recipe, and so what this is gonna do is it's gonna add all of the standard recipes, and it's also gonna add the modules that I want. Just gonna get my config history all up and running there. And the kind of benefit of having the project browser and kind of having that type of way of using the UI to see like what's available, I should probably cache here too. Okay, so in my extends tab where you have your list of modules that are on the site, there's some new tabs that are here. So the browse module one, Drupal CMS kind of has this included, and it gives you a list of everything that's on the Drupal site that gives you a list of modules. You can kind of look and see them from here, but this also gives you a list of all of your recipes, and not just your recipes, but the recipes that are available. I think if they have the composer type set to recipe as a project, it'll be up on this list. I think that's how that works. And so you can see how many recipes that you have available, and it gives you the command to run them. And so this kind of idea of making recipes that work, that are on Drupal.org available to you, or if you have your own package of recipes, either through a contributed module or through their own individual modules, you'll see that the recipes that I made are also showing up on this list. And so if there's a fear of like, oh, I have this folder of all of these recipes, and it's like, how do I manage all these recipes that you can, there's more UI elements that are being baked in, that are being supplied, that are being supported with Drupal CMS, and we're just able to kind of see, oh, I want my image styles. I don't want to make all those files again. I have my image styles module here. They're a recipe, it's on a module, but here's my image style recipe. So I have all these different aspect ratios. Each one of these, if we just look at 3x2, it's its own recipe that is turning on my image module, my focal point, and my responsive image, and it's adding the image styles that I've created. And I created these files once, and I don't need to create them again because I can just run the recipe. And if I just want this one, I can run this one. But in this folder, I have a list of, here's the image style recipe. It's going to make sure that my image media type from core is enabled, which it should, and I don't need to add what's already in this recipe to this one because it already exists. So it's always good to kind of take what's already been made, and then it's like, here's all my image style recipes. It's all been split off. Let's see how quickly I can run this one now. Image styles. And now all of those files are just going to be created. It's a little bit mad because of the thing, but now if I just refresh my page and go to media, where the media information for that sits in Drupal in the image styles, all these files are here. I don't need to make them again. They're going to be there. They're going to be the values that I want. And in a world where we need to handle a lot of different mobile design things, that we want to be able to like just have these files just be there. If there's a site that only needs some of them, I can still have this recipe and then apply them as needed. So that's kind of the like main function for what's going on there. What did I want to show? Oh, I guess I can show the Ratatouille thing quickly. Because we are at time, I talked a bit too long, sorry. But yeah, so the Ratatouille module, just to kind of show off what it is, I think it's neat. It's Drush Ratatouille Cook, and then you just give it a name. Let's just say, I could probably look for some image style ones. Let's just say I want to make another module that's just doing a specific thing. Let's say like mini or something. Do wrong. Oh, I can't do unders, of course. Just wanted that there. And then you can have your label. You can put in your recipe for image styles. I don't need an image. And then from here, it'll let you add like what modules you want. If there's content that exists on the site, you can add it from here too. This kind of setting is a little bit like work in progress, where it kind of just shows, it just sorts everything here just by like its first like image term. But say I just want the mini ones. Let's see here. What do we cut? Or this site doesn't have the mini ones. I guess XL or XC. That you can kind of go through. It only allows you to add like one at a time, but if you know specifically what you're looking for, I'll just do 2 as a quick example, whatever. But you add all the changes that you're wanting here. I want the focal point. I think I can probably work like that. I don't know. I don't have any content on the site right now, but yeah. And if I hit just finish, it'll give me a new recipe. I think it puts it actually in here. No, where did I forget where it puts it? Where did it just told me? It did? I can't see it right now. But yeah, image style mini. So there is a spot for it in the web folder for recipes, but you can start playing around with this. Okay, those are the 2 that I wanted. Here it's being split off. Those files are there. It's being straight from there. If I had content or other files, you can kind of start using modules like this, or just kind of taking your development cycle of taking information out from what works. If that is something that's well packaged, you can share it amongst your team or across other projects if they're all being put like that. I need to finish really quickly here. So just, yeah, we talked about config actions, applying changes, like I said, and how to use them. I just want to take a second just to highlight on where to learn more about them. Drupal.org has a whole whackload of information about starting recipes. There's a whole section to browse recipes. You can also look in Drupal Core. Inside Drupal Core, all of the core installation stuff, a lot of it's been separated into recipes too. And then you can also define your own, and Slack has a lot of information, the Drupal Slack channel if you're part of it. But yeah, there's all these recipes to kind of get started with. The kind of contribution cycle seems to be very close to modules, and so some of the what does this do? Local bright. It takes a little bit of working around of seeing what's available and what's there, but the idea is that we're trying to use this community to share what works, see what is around, see what's helping, and then being able to apply this to site templates or other types of recipe formats on a brand new site in a profile, or also just at large, like I'm maintaining this big project, I needed to do this one thing, and that's all I have time for today. But yeah. Yeah, so I think we're at lunch break now, but if anyone has any questions or wants to have a discussion, we have time now here, just it goes into your lunch break. But thank you very much for coming. Awesome, thanks. Excellent.
I am a little curious
yes.
about the use case, because I understand like when you want to share something across projects, for sure.
Yeah.
But is there like such a situation in which you want to write recipes for yourself just to, avoid having to do it manually?
Yes.
And then like it's done its job, and then you kind of don't need the recipe.
Yes. If you can build them in a way that makes them more portable in multiple situations, you're kind of now at this, well, does it do what I want? Can I add it, or is it just one and you're done? But
in which case you don't commit it. It's what you're
yeah. So you're benefited by saving your own time if you do need to do it again, and having that kind of like structure of, well, I can keep a list of recipes that I'm constantly doing, and then when I need them I can find them, like a big long Rolodex, but there's no commitment towards maintaining them or needing them to be attached to something or needing them to, and there's some now with like Drupal CMS, there's some like expectations now on, well, we use these recipes, now we want to maintain the recipes, but recipes are very much like, hey, if you install modules, it's not on us, it's on the modules. So for your own internal sake, or for your own like trusted sake, or from what's being available there's just a lot of like, I just want to see what this idea is. Oh, okay, I can just use this idea and then move forward. Is kind of where I'm seeing it being used. Like that image style thing, I would really like there to be a way to just give some information into the recipes keeping track of each other as they're all running the same time anyway, just to be like, oh, if I have like an image like starter size and I want all the other ones to just know of each other just so that they're a little bit different, but then it's like, well, I can just update that anyway. But the whole point is that they're very discrete, separate, and then you're in, like you're in and you're out. And yeah, it's applied there. But yeah.
So I was wondering about like the extensibility of recipes, because like when you're running the previous ones, they have to be already in your file names, like you're referring to them locally.
Yes.
So there's no way to like have someone else's recipe as a pre-requirement in your recipe unless it's like already.
It has to be there together.
Right.
If it's part of a,
It's not
like,
like you can write it dependencies.
you can make it dependent in there within like the composer files, so it's noted there. And I didn't talk about unpackaging, because the other thing is that if you're importing a recipe that has a composer file, those modules that are there aren't part of your main project, but there's a unpack extension that will, when a recipe runs, it'll take those dependencies and then add them to the main composer file. So you don't have to like, oh, well, my site never had focal point before, but now I need focal point. If you have the unpack plugin as part of your composer package, it will know and it will just add them for you, because that's kind of the thing. So it kind of, as your own structure, if you're just keeping the like what's being supplied, making the recipes forcing you to know where it's coming from, and then if the module's not installed yet, and if the module doesn't exist yet, and you're trying to install it, it'll just say like, I don't know what this module name is, just like you tried adding something with core extensions and it wasn't there. So it has some limits for sure, and even in that like that sharing kind of aspect of it, right? Of like, well, if I have all of my recipes in a custom module for all my recipes, and then attach that to the site, it's like that being part of the site forever doesn't matter anymore. But if it's part of the site and those recipes are in scope of each other, then the naming stuff will be fine. But that one recipe file is kind of the main like roadmap of what's going to happen. So you can change change where things are or omit lines and then run it, and it's very flexible. You just kind of have to know like what will happen, and you can get into some kind of weird like order problems of like, there was a site that we did, we had to put everything into a profile, but there were some things that were breaking in the recipe as it was run as a profile. So we had to like separate, okay, oh, what doesn't work? Oh, we can't do search API at the same time that we're installing the content types. So we had to figure out like what was erroring for the profile, split them off into their own recipe, and then it's like a profile, like 4 recipes, and then everything else is installed, it's fine. Yeah, so it's definitely like we need to be aware of where the branches are going, right?
Yeah, I was also thinking like recipes is such a big part of Drupal CMS too.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to make it more like lower the barrier of entry.
Yes.
And I just like, there's still the reliance on doing things on the command line to
Well,
install recipes, right?
if you give a content editor that project manager thing, and it's like, look at these recipes, like press the button and then it will just apply the recipe.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we're one click away from being able to just run recipes on prod. It's not going to persist, but like knowing that a content editor like is close to being able to at least try something. Like you shouldn't try things on prod, but like you can have that be available somewhere, or have them like look at it and be like, oh, what's this feature do? That there's a bit more of like a trial run or like a demo run kind of thing there. But yeah, it's definitely like, for us, we're really trying to speed up the way that we're adding single directory components to things. That's kind of our big, like, we have our components. Drupal's like, great, you can put components wherever you want, but there's no quick, like, we want these to be in a view, we want these to be in a display, and there's a config action that I'm waiting for that's like set, it's, what is it? Set third-party component. And once that's working, then it's like, oh, I have my SDC, and it can add it to Layout Builder, and I don't have to hit that button to add section to find the thing and then put it in there. And it's like, if I can make displays on my own, and I can add, like right now you can add layout blocks or add fields, no problem, but it's just the being able to like, I just want, like, say it's a card paragraph that just has its display and it's the component. It's like, oh, that saves so much time. I might have to nudge somebody or myself to work on that one. But like, yeah, there's a whole like, it's I called it the secret life of config actions, because there's some config actions there that remind me of the ECA action module stuff, where it's like, hey, do something. And it's like, hey, we're doing something with config and not just with content. So it's
one click install scenario. Sorry. No, go. Like how would they handle the prompt action if you're prompting the user for input? Like on command line, it's fine.
yeah, I don't know, like a modal, I guess. If like, hey, I'm about to apply this thing, like you can kind of have that user experience of be a thing. Is how I kind of envision it, but it's kind of just like it's we need to promote the like sharing communication of recipes that are there, and then if we have like kind of a sunsetting of the Drupal features for 7 days of like, hey, we kind of had this, but it kind of doesn't fit in the same type of lens. I would much rather trust, like, for me, just, hey, like, here's a recipe that is solving a problem, that they're kind of problem-based, but they're kind of just doing one specific thing. But like, if you kind of can kind of sift through that part of like, hey, like, if you run these 3 recipes that don't really do what they need to do together, but I know that they'll work together, then I can just see, okay, is this the setting that I want? Is this the configuration I want? Is this the solution that I want? Okay, good, commit it, and just go with it. So, yeah, I would much rather us like pass recipes around like old like USB drives for things, right? And it's like, like that's so much easier than just a module that you have to like tie down to and update, and then it's breaking, and then it's all this stuff. So it kind of pushes that responsibility to the module side, but that discovery, I'm hoping that we can kind of get to that point of like, hey, let's try it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you have a
Sure.
module that's, how are you doing?
You're doing well.
Or sorry, if you have a recipe that is dependent on a bunch of other recipes prompted by your mention of the prompts.
Yes.
And those dependent recipes are also having
Yes.
prompting. Are you going to go through do they show up in the?
Yes, but they'll show up. The one that you're running will run last, and they won't talk to each other. But
Okay, so you'll actually have to be pretty knowledgeable about some of the instantiation of the earlier.
Yeah, really, and like how much like click through like, oh, now I'm in like some weird game of like text-based adventure of like which recipe is this? Yeah, it's a very like. When I first started making one, it's like I can put anything in there, and I put everything in there, and it's like, yeah, you can, but it's if everything's being thrown in, like you don't need setting files, like just like a setting, that the modules will make them themselves. So there's a lot of things that you don't need. It's just a